Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. I am Jared Tanny, of course, and this is Adam Fuller. Say hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam. And we have a terrific guest today who's going to introduce himself in a second with his biography, his intellectual biography, and his important work that he's doing at the moment. But I will say this about him before we start. Andrew Koss, I'm spoiling his name by mentioning it in advance, wrote a very important piece, which he's going to tell us all about in Mosaic about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, subsequently engaging about that piece in a podcast with David Myers, who has come up numerous times on this podcast, professor of Jewish studies at UCLA. And this is one of, I would say, in a growing list of pieces. I would calculate it, if you count the stuff that I've written as just one piece, probably the fourth or fifth piece, documenting what's going on in Jewish studies, the very troubling situation of them basically aiding and abetting anti-Semitism on campus through their research, perhaps, and certainly through their public statements. So I'm now going to let Andrew introduce himself, and then we're going to have a very fruitful discussion about Andrew's piece.
Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, Adam. It's good to be here. As mentioned, my name is Andrew Koss. I am a recovering academic. I received a PhD focusing in Eastern European Jewish history from Stanford in 2010, which I don't normally like to parade around my credentials, but this is sort of key to everything else. I then did the teaching thing for 4 years, failed to get a permanent tenure track job. And at that point, while I was looking for one, I got a job working for an online magazine, which was then brand new, called Mosaic, based in New York City, a magazine of Jewish ideas. And I am now the senior editor of that publication. And I've been there almost 10 years, and we write about Jewish issues from a right of center point of view. We're very Zionist, a lot of stuff about Israel, but also Jewish thought, Jewish literature, et cetera, et cetera. And recently, given all the mishigas, if I may use a Yiddish word, I think I'm allowed here.
We're allowed to we give the Shmigegi of the Year award. I mean, come on.
By the way,
the name of the show is Kvetching.
Yes, the title, The Good, the Bad, the Bad, and the Shmigega was just really inspired. I have to give that to you. That was the title of their last episode.
Yeah.
So given the Michigas and college campuses, I started asking myself, where are the Jewish studies professors in this? And I started off actually with a piece that never got published, or I never completed, and then got folded into this, going after Holocaust and genocide studies professors, especially your guys' friend Omer Bartov, and Raz Siegel, who's like an even worse version of Omer Bartov.
Which I will add is that's a very recent development. I mean, Bartov might have been heading in that way, for a while, but it was really only, on the eve of October 7th that he went full throttle.
Yeah, look, I really admire his work. His books helped to shape me. I met him very, very early on my career and did some research for him. He's always been very, very kind to me and supportive. So I have lots of nice things to say about him. And this is the beginning of a theme that will keep recurring, where people whose scholarship I appreciate and who people I appreciate as human beings in the flesh start writing op-eds and making declarations that I find somewhere between troubling and abhorrent. That's the range.
Can I ask a quick question about
please.
that?
Yes.
Why are so many reasonable scholars abandoning their academic sensibilities?
Yes, I mean this is the $100 million question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one I failed to answer in my piece, but it was one of the questions that animated the piece because it's hard to do. But look, there are so many times when you have professors who are very intelligent and very good scholars make declarations about politics that just seem to me to be wacko. And maybe it's just because, look, maybe there's no grand explanation. Maybe it's just I'm a kind of person of the moderate right and professors are all on the left. But things that are just so extreme. I mean, I'll give you an example. like this would be a great example if I could remember the name, Fritz Stern, a great historian of now the late Fritz Stern, a great historian of 19th century Germany, wrote a really a seminal book about Bleichroeder, who was an important Jewish German financier in the 19th century.
About who? Could you repeat the name?
Bleichroeder is
Bleichroeder.
the person.
By the way, as a recovering academic, you're not supposed to use the word seminal anymore. I just have to,
Oh yeah,
if I didn't point that out.
I have a couple. Sometimes I even say discourse. At Mosaic, we're not academic, but we're very pointy-headed, so we have some leeway. But I remember, and this is a little off topic, but I think it's worth thinking about. During the George W. Bush administration, Fritz Stern talking about how I remember Weimar Germany, and I see, America going in these troubling ways, sliding into fascism. Again, I think this is really key. There's plenty to criticize about George W. Bush. Plenty of criticisms I think are totally reasonable, even if I don't agree with them. Some I do agree with. But this sort of lack of perspective and extremity of this comparison is just mind-boggling. And I kept thinking, Professor Stern, you've got to know better. Let me come back to that, but let's put that out there, and then I want to talk about my piece a little bit.
One intervention here. At the
Please.
time, in 2021, when this stuff started to explode, and I wrote, and I will take credit for writing the worst, or the first op, maybe it is the worst, but the first op-ed about this Jewish studies you have failed, when they produced that statement with 250 signatures attacking Israel during the 2021 Israel-Gaza war. And then Troy and Sharansky wrote the Un-Jews piece about.
Sorry, is this the elephant in the room?
No, this is 2 years before the.
Before that, okay, yes.
Yeah, this is 21. This is
okay,
when they had that brief war over the summer. And again, the shocking thing, if you watch my presentation on campus anti-Semitism, is I knew this was going on back in 2017 for reasons that we can get into after. But the fact that 250 people signed it, attacking Israel using Jewish supremacy and language. And David Hirsch, the sociologist in Britain, summed it up aptly that summer, that the ticket of admission into campus social justice clubs, which you have to be admitted into, otherwise you're going to be ostracized, is to be an anti-Zionist. I mean, that is one of the #1 requisites. I mean, aside from denouncing white supremacy, but who doesn't denounce white supremacy, right? But you have to declare your opposition to Israel, and Jewish studies wants in. So, I mean, that is the mortgaging or the abandoning or the distorting of their scholarship in order to get into the club. I mean, that's a simple answer to it. I don't know if it's necessarily 100% accurate or it's the only reason, but it certainly is a factor, I think.
And the other thing is people are in academia and they're inhaling the fumes that are just everywhere. And they get their perspective on the world at large, partially from the New York Times and partially from the New York Review of Books, which is very, very politically extreme left, I would say, and also has been since like the 1970s, is anti-Israel to the extent of being anti-Semitic. I mean, this is not something a new problem, though they've been extreme.
Yet all the leftists are canceling their subscriptions to the New York Times because they claim it's like a centrist publication, and they're always doing it ostentatiously on social media. So,
QED. So I canceled my subscription to the New York Times too. So there you go.
I get it from school, so
Yeah. So there were these declarations by scholars of Holocaust and genocide studies accusing Israel. And I think one of these was written on like October 11th. I may be off by a few days, but before the Israeli response started, this was an open letter in the New York Review of Books, which we were just discussing, saying all these people are comparing October 7th to the Holocaust. It's actually nothing like the Holocaust, which is an interesting comparison and worth saying why it's nothing like the Holocaust, but they actually had very little to say about that. Instead, they said, oh, you know who's really like the Holocaust? Israel. And this is, again, just insane. So I was thinking about that, and then you start getting these statements from various Jewish studies professors who are joining with the condemnations of Israel, and worse yet, you do not see Jewish studies professors. I mean, you see some, but very, very few. Certainly nobody outside Jared and Adam's network, the Jewish Studies Zionist Network. Is that the official title?
Jewish Studies Zionist Network.
Yes. I got it right on the first try. Nobody is standing up for the Jews on campus. Now, this is important because professors have the right. I think I think it's very admirable if you want to say, I'm a professor, I'm not going to be political, I'm not going to sign any statements about politics. What's happening on campus is right in front of you. It concerns Jewish students. And I think you have some responsibility as a Jewish studies professor to say something about what's going on. And instead, you see the opposite. You see Derek Penslar, who I'll say something nice about him in a minute. But first, I want to say, what's the quote they get from him? Some of this anti-Semitism is exaggerated. I mean, that is not helpful. That is undermining the Jewish students and the real anti-Semitism. And at the very least, it's really not thinking strategically about what's good for stopping anti-Semitism, which I think in his heart, Derek Penslar would like to see less anti-Semitism. Finally, recently, he and another professor came out with a op-ed in the Crimson. This is now about 5 or 6 weeks ago, saying, there's anti-Semitism and it's bad.
Who did he write that with? I'm sure I saw it, but
I don't remember. It was not somebody whose name I recognized, which is why I forgot it.
You hit the nail on the head though with the pattern, and that you brought it up during your discussion with Myers, but he did not address it. And Myers is a big player in this because he was one of the founders, or at least on the coordinating committee for all of the Jewish Studies Activist Network, which I was brought into in like 2017. Allegedly, their goal was to fight fascism, but it clearly became an anti-Zionist operation. And they were churning out statements left and right in defense of Muslims, in defense of these people and that people, criticizing Israel, nothing about anti-Semitism from the left. And I brought up an incident that was clearly anti-Semitic when JVP attacked Orthodox gay Jews at an Israel Day parade in New York, and they wouldn't do anything about it. They thought it was okay to do that. And I said, what does this have to do with Israel? You're attacking gay Orthodox Jews. They went after gay Orthodox Jews because they're vulnerable. They know they can't be targeted in public because of the families they come from and whatever else. They're probably out being gay in public for the first time in their lives and want to be proud gay Jews. And you don't care that they're being attacked because they're being associated with a Jewish state that should be at least tacitly supporting in one way or another. But if you don't want to, that's fine. Support them. So the pattern, and again, I will give you a concrete example here, and I'll try to name as few names as possible because this is all unfolded in the past 6 months. Derek Penslar, director of Jewish Studies at Harvard, was named the director or chair of an anti-Semitism task force after Harvard was put under the microscope with Claudine Gay. I don't know Derek Penslar personally. I've read some of his work. There was a huge outcry from the center right about appointing Penslar on it. I perused his work at the time. Maybe we even talked about it on the podcast. Penslar's, at least at that point, was fun. I mean, yeah, he's writing about Israel. He's obviously going to criticize the state. His academic research is on that, but he's not descending into this post-colonial stuff. He says in his book that the settler colonialism paradigm doesn't really work that well for Israel, even if you might see some elements. Why shouldn't he be on a task force? He's the director of Jewish Studies at Harvard. Now, here's the thing, though. When he was attacked from the right, Jewish Studies, and I'm assuming Myers played a role, he certainly signed it, turned out a statement defending him in 5 minutes. Okay, hundreds and hundreds of signatures. I didn't sign it. I didn't know him well enough. I didn't want to, get into that, but I had no problem with the statement as it was framed. It was fine. What happens when Jewish studies professors are attacked from the left on campus? Okay, and I have 2 friends who I won't name who teach California schools, one in the UC system, one in the Cal State system, and they have been skewered over the past 4 or 5 months, like to the point where they've had to get security involved and whatnot. And I can't go into the details of who they were, but the faculty in Jewish studies are well aware that this is happening to them. One of them, at least, if not both, are insiders, meaning they're on good terms and they're friends with all the people who signed the Penslar letters. I'm not on good terms with those people anymore, but he's definitely friends with them and spends time with them and goes to the AGS every year. Why didn't they write a statement defending him? Why not? right? If they could defend Penciller and they can't defend him, even though this guy's not some radical right-wing nut, he's very much in the middle. The talk he gave that sparked it was about how to bring about peace in the Middle East, which, really, if you're a let's win this war guy, you're not going to, at all costs, you're not going to give a talk like that at this point. But he was attacked for that. And no letter of defense, not a word, maybe some private sympathies, because they won't attack the left. They fear attacking the left in public.
Exactly. I mean, I think I couldn't say that any better. I mean, your examples, which I wish I'd known about some of them, are very illustrative. But let me add, so there was some attacks that by people journalists I generally like, but attacks on Derek Penciller that went into his work and took things out of it just to make him look like he was some sort of propagator of anti-Semitism. These were unfair. But what has Derek done? He has signed a lot of open letters, right? He's signed on to, and I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe he might have played a prominent role in the Jerusalem Declaration.
He signed it. I don't know if he was one of the authors, but he definitely signed it.
He signed it. I mean, lots of people I signed it. Lots of people I like very much signed it.
Absolutely. I mean, Susanna Heschel signed it, and I absolutely respect her in every respect, and I've brought her to campus twice here.
But here's the problem with the Jerusalem Declaration. Do you mind if I get into this for a second?
Please, go ahead. No, we talk about IRA and JDA all the time, so please.
Yeah. So for anyone who's just catching up here, a bunch of years ago, this thing called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance created this thing called the Working Definition of Anti-Semitism, which gives you a tool. I don't know you guys know this, but just in case people are listening who don't know this, it gives institutions a tool for labeling things anti-Semitism, including criticism of Israel that is not criticism of Israel at all, but saying death to the Israelis and stuff like that. I mean, that's a very loose definition. People don't like it. So they create this thing called the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism. It has the word Jerusalem in it. It's from a kind of left-wing academic institute, the Van Leer Institute in Israel. It's signed by a lot of Jewish studies professors and other people. And it's very academic. To me, there's not much about it that bothers me in terms of its language. It's in some ways better written than the IHRA or IRA definition. The problem with it is, why would you say, oh no, we're so worried this declaration about the definition of anti-Semitism is going to label the wrong people anti-Semites? Which most of the critique in it, I think, is unfounded to the extent of being lies. I mean, it's basically dishonest. The normal critique you hear is that it brands any criticism of Israel anti-Semitism, and it actually goes to great lengths to avoid doing that. So now you have a controversy about the definition of anti-Semitism. It's now the controversial IRA definition. So the Jerusalem Declaration only complicates things when the whole point of IRA is to have something useful, not for scholars, but for institutions to turn to. So to me, the whole point of that is to protect the wrong people, i.e. leftists, from getting accused of anti-Semitism.
Well, the problem with JDA is that it completely negates the whole purpose of having a working definition of anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
That we needed one because we needed to incorporate a kind of anti-Israelism or anti-Zionism, whatever you want to call it, into anti-Semitism. Like, not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, but there's a kind of anti-Israel rhetoric that becomes anti-Semitic, and you know it when you see it, right? It can't necessarily be defined. That's why it needs a working definition rather than an actual hard definition. The JDA goes ahead and says, look, we're gonna say that we're gonna have a definition of anti-Semitism or a working definition of anti-Semitism without that. So what's the
Yeah, that's extremely well put.
There's two things that well, actually three. I'm going to bring up David Hirsch again with the JDA, which, as you suggest, in many respects is a perfectly sound definition. The first issue is their get out of jail free card, which is point number 15 at the end, which political speech does not have to be measured, proportional, tempered, or reasonable to be protected under Article 19 of the Universal Declarations of Human Rights or Article 10, blah, 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 excessive or contentious. I don't have to read the whole thing. Oh, but it has the words double standard in here. So that's their get out of jail free card. So people could attack Israel, compare them to Nazis and whatever else. Like, we compare Putin to Nazis all the time. What are you saying about it? Or some people can if they want to. We can be focused on disproportionately focused on Israel. Why can't we? Now, double standards to me, are a form of discrimination. If everyone is a criminal in a group of people, yet the authorities go in and only arrest the African American, there's something going on there that's problematic, even though they know the other people committed crimes as well. So they have their get out of jail free card with that. The second thing is David Hirsch, and he wrote a lot about it at the time, was that they used, I don't know where in it exactly, but they kept using the phrase in and of itself is not anti-Semitic, which, and he was like, what the hell does that mean? He's a sociologist, so life doesn't occur in a vacuum, okay? So there's nothing that's in and of itself. It's always contextual, and you have to bring that. Now, here's the big incriminating problem with it. There are sections in here that clearly identify when targeting Israel is anti-Semitic, and one of the points, it's in section B, number 6, and it's expanded on later, but we don't have to go into that. Applying the symbols, images, and negative stereotypes of classical anti-Semitism to the state of Israel. People on the left do that all the time, and I have yet to hear a JDA signatory or author actually condemn it. For instance, the Cooney Law School speech from last spring. She made Zionism out to be this conspiratorial octopus-like threat taking over the world. And she ends her speech with fighting the global threat of capitalism, racism, imperialism, two of the three of those, and Zionism. Now, I wrote about this somewhere, like, how is Zionism a global threat? Even if it's a threat to every living Palestinian, let's just assume that's a possibility for a second, which is obviously not true. That's not a global threat. We're talking about 80% of them in the Middle East and then a 20% diaspora somewhere. I had to basically force it out of Mira Sukharov's mouth to admit it on her Facebook page. Please tell me if this is anti-Semitic or not. Please tell me. I had to repeat it over and over again until she finally admitted, yes, that's wrong. She should not be, this person should not be saying that. Why not show that you actually stand by your statement and condemn these things, and then you can establish the boundary of what you think is fair criticism of Israel or not. But they won't criticize the left. So my theory with that is this is, and I might not be the first one to have said this, maybe David said this as well, that this is their showpiece. Hey, we're doing something about anti-Semitism. Look what we drafted. And what, you're calling on us to say something? We don't have to. We've already drafted this. We could condemn things in general terms. So I think this was definitely done for show. And I think given that it does come off as decent, except for the few problematic posts, I think that's why you have a lot of moderates who signed it, because it's really a broad swath of Jewish studies who signed this. And a lot of the signatories are not people who would normally sign some of these other statements using language like settler colonialism. They might not say, well, I'm not going to condemn that publicly, but I'm still not going to sign anything ever, calling Israel a settler colonial state. So I think this is a show.
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, again, it never occurred to me to think of it that way, but you're absolutely got to be right. And I also have to say that a few years ago, Josh Moravchik wrote a long piece for Mosaic about the definitions and the war about them, which I should recommend to your viewers.
Is he or she?
Joshua.
He signed our statement, Jared.
Okay. Hey, listen, there's 210 signatories, I am proud to say, and I don't remember the names of everyone who has signed. Hey, Andrew, you need to sign our statement too. Sorry.
Yeah, I am very, very reluctant because I'm not formally an academic. Do I still count?
Absolutely. The criteria.
Okay, so I'm fine. I will now
have their PhD in Jewish studies and have taught either, if you're not in academia anymore, you need to have a degree in Jewish studies of some sort or another. If you got your degree in, let's just say, straight up Russian history, but you teach Jewish history now, then you are qualified. So you're in the orbit and you have the doctorate, so you qualify.
I am signing all your statements.
Thank you. I'm glad I did this on the air.
And I'm glad I'm saying it on the air. So, but this brings us back to the point that, there's an outbreak of anti-Semitism. What are people going to do? They're going to ask professors of Jewish history, what's going on? Is this anti-Semitism? Why is there so much anti-Semitism? Because that's the obvious thing to do, especially if you're a professor at Harvard, because as much as it pains me to say, Harvard is always held up as the greatest of all universities. I mean, that's just where people's minds go first.
Mhm.
And you have some obligation to be responsible about that role, even if it's not a role you ever wanted. And there's silence. I mean, we have people like Shai Davidai. We have professors on campuses who are standing up for the Jewish students. None of them, or almost none of them, are in Jewish studies.
That's the point. That's a very important point.
And that's what really worked me up to write this article. And then after getting started on that, I said, I have to ask a different question, which has not been asked so much, which is, what is the connection between this and the directions in the scholarship? And that really was what got me into this whole thing about de-Judaizing. You've touched on this a little bit. A guy named, oh my God, Josh Carlip. Sorry, a total senior moment there. Josh Carlip, who's a friend of mine, has written a couple things about this. So I really wanted to dig into this. To be totally honest, I didn't come up with an answer that's entirely satisfactory to me, but I hope I made some progress in kind of opening this up and looking at the connections between negative trends in the scholarship, bad trends in the scholarship, I should say, and this sort of soft peddling of anti-Semitism, or even essentially joining the anti-Semites.
And for our viewers who didn't read the article or watch the Mosaic debate with David Myers, those were key focal points, especially in the second part of the debate, and that's something that we want to address because it's a very important idea that Andrew is bringing up, and we'd like to hear what he has to say about it and then discuss it further. So,
okay. So, I started looking at the AJS conference from December, and the AJS, Association of Jewish Studies, the major association really in the diaspora for promoting professional or academic organization for the field. I've been to the conference many times. It used to be a lot of fun, as much as an academic conference can be fun if you're that perverse to find one fun.
The Slavic Studies Association is a lot more fun than the AJS.
Really?
They drink and have a good time, and they don't worry about all the
Interesting. All right. Well, I have to get myself invited once. I was once at the Baltic and Scandinavian conference, which was not fun at all.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be dull. Though they drink a lot in Finland, so I imagine there's some space for a good time.
But I just looked through the topics. A lot of interesting looking things. But there were just so many panels that, first of all, whenever it was about Israel, I noticed three things. One is that whenever it was about Israel, almost every time there was a hard anti-Israel focus. So I'm sorry, I don't have my data in front of me, but what you would have is a panel that has a professor, like I think it was an Arab professor of law, who is a BDSer. And that's sort of representing the pro-Palestinian voice, and then representing the Israeli voice is Mira Sukharov, who's an Israeli American post-Zionist / anti-Zionist.
That was her response to something on an earlier incident. But is Mira? She's not Israeli by descent, is she? She's born in Canada.
Okay.
I don't think. Sorry, she happens to have a name that sounds Israeli, but I don't think.
She occasionally publishes in Haaretz, I think, which is why I might have thought that, but that doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
So I misspoke. But yeah, so that's the kind of diversity of views, whereas you get very few pro-Israel views, and then you have this panel that talks about Netanyahu and how the Netanyahu's political theology, something, which I mean, I doubt Netanyahu has a political theology. Here's the quote. Explicitly aims at preventing Jews from following a natural impulse to retreat towards liberal diasporic forms of Judaism aimed at maintaining the torch of universalist ethics. So what is that saying? That's saying the real natural Jewish thing is universalism, And anything that's not universalism is unnatural. Now, it's not saying universalism is better. It's saying it's unnatural to Jews.
Which is a problem. But can't you argue, and this
Yeah.
came up in the first part of the podcast, which we're not going to get into the weeds with
Yeah.
too much, but
Yeah.
I've noticed, being a Jewish historian, and I'm by no means an expert on the Tanakh or anything, but obviously I know it and I teach parts of it. Hasn't there always been a tension in Jewish history from the very beginning between chosenness and between a quest for normativity? Right, that's a big tension. And I mean, even when the Jews want a king early on and they want Samuel to get a king for them, it's we want to be like everyone else. We want to be like the other nations. So I've just noticed that that's a recurring pattern, and it doesn't have to be politicized. It doesn't. It's just an interesting theological and historical dimension to Judaism and the Jewish people.
Of course, and it's a really interesting one in Judaism. But I mean, look, I would say that in Polish history, you have that tension as well. I mean, that's just an area of non-Jewish history that I know very well, and even in Russian history, right? I mean, isn't this just the debate between the Enlighteners and the Slavophiles?
Yeah, that's the West versus the distinct path. Yeah,
Yeah,
it could be argued that that's a similar thing to it.
This is Dugan. I mean, this is I mean, in some ways, it's a universal kind of tension about regarding universalism.
That's a good.
I mean, again, it's a particularly fruitful tension, but until the 19th century, with the exception of Jewish Christians, there's a lot of particularism. And
Jewish, did you say Jewish Christians?
Yeah, meaning, sorry, I should qualify. In the first century, some of the first Christians were Jews who adopted this new kind of Judaism that later became Christianity, and then there were Gentiles. So there's a sort of term of art for scholars of the first century. Yeah, the sort of the Jewish founders of Christianity, the early Christians who were originally Jews. I mean, Paul is betting big on universalism, right?
Though Paul did say that Jews are supposed to, people of Jewish descent need to follow halacha. They're not supposed to.
Get circumcised. And that's the part that everyone always forgets in the epistle to the Romans. My favorite epistle. But yeah, so I mean, this tension is always there, but it's not saying that. It's not even my problem with this statement isn't a claim that universalism is better than particularism. It's saying that universalism is somehow natural to the Jews and particularism isn't, which is just empirically wrong.
Yeah.
But also by saying that somehow basically anything Zionist, and Netanyahu is just a stand-in, but anything Zionist is a sort of offense to Judaism, and we have to kind of root out Zionism, I mean, which is very, very troubling. And it's also very weird. I mean, it's a kind of, as I said in the paper, it's a kind of essentialism, saying that Jews have a kind of nature, which you would never say about any other group in academia these days. That the essentialism was one of the great crimes in academia.
And it's also impossible. I mean, half of world Jewry lives in Israel.
Yes.
And most Jews in the world are at least in some way supportive of Zionism.
Yeah. So
if you're against Zionism, you want to get Zionism out of the Jewish character, good luck with that.
It's like, I think it's the French scholar Francois Fourier who said that when Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously said men are born free and everywhere are in chains. Yeah. And Fourier says it's like saying sheep are born carnivores, but everywhere eat grass, right? And this is the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But that's one step. The real disturbing thing is signs of not just anti-Zionism, but something that resembles anti-Semitism. And again, I'm not saying Jewish studies has become an incubator of anti-Semitism. I'm not saying that the AJS is filled with anti-Semites, but I'm saying that there are inroads of these things that are disturbing. And the panel that was the best example for me was about Jews in the West.
When you say West, do you mean
the American West,
the far West?
The American West.
The American West.
So, what a cool thing! But this one paper is going after this sort of historical memory of Jewish pioneers in the American West, because it erases the genocidal settler colonialism, whatever what happens, maybe there's something to it. But if you look at the way this is phrased, we have the word Jews, we have the word settler colonialist. It's hard in the context of 2024 and 2023 to not see this. I guess this was 2023, to not see this as saying, oh, look at these Jews being settler colonialists in, I don't know, Nevada and Arizona. And that's disturbing, because here, first of all, it's yelling at Jews for being bad and having to do tshuva for the sins of, literally for the sins of their fathers. And then it's adding to that by saying that, by implying that these are Jews being settler colonialists, and we all knew that's what Jews do, and that's really bad.
And it's also, it's part of the quest to implicate Jews in whiteness, right?
Yes,
Jews,
yeah.
Which is a big line of theirs, right? And in an imposter sort of way, right? Jews have sort of this unearned privilege. They jumped over the line to get into whiteness. They somehow earned it faster than everyone else. And when people say that, there's always a bit of malice in their voice when I hear non-Jews say stuff like that.
Yeah, and David Duke has said things like that also. I mean, this is it's the complete marriage of the right-wing anti-Semitism and the left-wing anti-Semitism. It's,
from a purely academic point of view too, it's not, I don't think it's very interesting. I don't think so. Okay, fine. Jews were on the white side of the color line. We all know that. It was legally fine. Obviously, if they're going out west, they're going to be involved in the things that white people do out west. And if that's all you're trying to show, it's like, okay, fine. I mean, that's fine. So you're writing them out and you're making them part of a universalist American history, when what would be far more interesting would be to say how they carved out some sort of Jewish identity that makes them somewhat different, although related to the other people out on the frontier doing it. I mean, that's, we're expressing our Jewishness in a variety of ways. If I'm teaching Judah Benjamin from the Confederate government, I mean, the interesting part about that is not that he was a slave owner, with 2,500 slaves, which I guess is interesting because there weren't many, right? I mean, that part is interesting. But it's at the same time how the guy built his career as a white Jew in the South who, never converted to Christianity. He had this Jewish identity that he didn't think much of, but certainly never denied it. How he kept reinventing himself, and
wasn't he Sephardic?
Yeah, they all were in those days. The ones who made it up into that high into the ranks, like David Yulee from Florida, also presumably was a Sephardic descent. They were both the first two Jews in the Senate. But Judah Benjamin is the one who came up with the proposal. And again, from a moral 2024 standpoint, it's still reprehensible. But let's liberate all slaves who are willing to fight for the Confederacy. And the rest of the government shot that down. Now, I find it very interesting that it was the Jewish guy in the government who came up with that idea, and it sort of speaks that they have less, quote, loyalty to white supremacy, if we want to frame it that way, or to the legacy of Britain and whatever else. I mean, it's really interesting. The guy has a business mind. He has a military mind. And what does that say about his Jewish origin? Maybe there's a relationship there, right? Now that to me is interesting, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think being interesting is less compelling and also less sexy, as in, to use the word sexy in the academic sense, which means something that people will find exciting and appealing as research that will get more.
I'm writing down the first part of that statement. Being interesting is less compelling, because I think that sums up academia in so many ways.
Yeah, but there's this idea, right? When academics talk about topics being sexy, what they mean is that they use certain buzzwords and buzz concepts that sort of bring people in and that are trendy. And in Jewish studies, the trend is to talk about how bad Jews are.
Now here this goes back to what you were suggesting with your debate with David Myers.
Yeah.
Is this trend to speak ill of the Jews in their scholarship related to poor academic training and not deep knowledge of Jewish history and Jewish studies, which can be true. If I decided to write French history tomorrow, I don't have the requisite training to do that. And two, is it related to their lack of, I don't want to say their lack of being Jewish, because I don't want to get all genetic here, but their lack of what I might call cultural fluency in Jewish stuff. So I went to a Jewish day school for for 12 years, the hardcore thing, never paid attention. I was a lousy student, didn't 12 years of Hebrew when I was in 4th, 5th semester in grad school. But I had this cultural fluency because it was my universe, growing up in such a way. And even if I never learned the Tanakh from cover to cover, to quote George Costanza, I know the basic plot, right? Like I have my way around it, and that makes me an insider in such a way without having to do the hardcore training in Jewish studies that I went through for Russian history for me to be a genuine Russian historian. So you touched on in your podcast, in your piece, on this lack of rigorous Jewish training and Jewish knowledge and cultural fluency leading to this problem in academia. So I want to expand on that and what the relationship between those things are.
So certainly there are guilty parties who are perfectly culturally fluent.
See, Omer Bartov, I would say, does not fit that model of what you just put forth, right? Because
or David Myers,
right,
or other people. I mean, look, I even dinged. I mean, it's a much less severe example, but David Sorkin, who I think is one of the greatest experts on modern Jewish history. But I wrote a whole other piece about him a couple of years ago when these sort of things fused. He writes this brilliant book about Jewish emancipation. It covers hundreds of years of history. It brings it all together in this really incredibly impressive way. And then it ends with him kvetching about Jews doing things he doesn't like.
Well, everything David Beale's written ends like that too. I mean, Power and Powerlessness in Jewish History is a brilliant book, and then at the end, it turns out to be a smear against Israel. It's like, why are you ruining it? Why do you have to do that? You wrote this masterpiece here, which might not be right about everything, but it's still it's a terrific book. I like assigning it. But do you have to bash Israel for 10 pages in the last chapter? What's the point?
Yeah, well, and this is a trend. I mean, it's a problem. Part of the problem is conclusions, right? If you will find so many academic books where if you read the conclusion, it's like a brilliant book, and then the conclusion is just sort of vomitly inducingly stupid. It's either a ton of jargon, or it's it's these sort of wild political comparisons, comparisons to contemporary politics that makes no sense and are poorly thought through, or something like that. And this
historians are supposed to know better. Historians are supposed to know better. No offense, political scientists, but we're not supposed to do stuff like that.
But we do, because we want to be relevant, right? So you want to say something relevant, and this goes totally beyond Jewish studies. So you say something about whatever is on your mind, whatever is trending, and what's trendy in Jewish studies, but to complain about Israel. I mean, Sorkin is not an anti-Zionist, as far as I know, and there's nothing anti-Zionist about what he says. He's just kvetching about things he doesn't like about Israel and things he doesn't like about American Jews. So, and this is somebody who's incredibly learned in every possible way. And
he attacked me, by the way, at a workshop.
Oh.
It's a good story. Let me just divert. It's funny. It was 2000, whenever he was writing the book. So I'm going back at least 7, maybe 8 years. And he was presenting, we were having our North Carolina Jewish Studies Consortium up at Raleigh, and he was presenting a chapter of his book. And I wanted to introduce myself beforehand because he did his PhD at Berkeley, I did mine, and he got excited. Oh, did you also work with Martin Jay, the big intellectual historian? I said, no, I worked with Yuri Slezkine and John Efron. And he sort of made a face when I said Yuri Slezkine. And then in the middle of his his talking, he was getting into the details of the emancipation of the Jews somewhere at one point. And he said, look, you have to look at these small, minute incidents and this and that. And then he points to me. His advisor wrote this sweeping, garbage history of Jewish history from the beginning to the end. And then he, as a divergence from some book he wrote about some apartment building, and he's just sitting there pointing at me. And it's like, I graduated 8 years ago. Like, what are you doing? Like, I mean, what the hell? You're not supposed to be doing this.
He's right about Yuri Slezkine, though.
Well, we won't go there.
He's wrong to pick on you just for being a student, but I mean, the apartment thing is brilliant of that essay. But anyways, so what I would say is it's not so much cause and effect, but two separate trends that are feeding off of each other. Because when you get a new generation of scholars who are basically slapping the label Jewish studies on things because it gives them some added cachet and don't have any of this knowledge, actual knowledge about Jewish history, or deep knowledge of Jewish history, or of Judaism, because it's at some point you have to know something about Judaism. I mean, again, not everybody has to be a Talmud whiz. Not everyone has to be absolutely free. I'm nothing like a Talmud whiz. Not everyone has to be totally fluent in Hebrew. But if you know nothing about Judaism, at a certain point, your scholarship on Jews is going to hit a brick wall. Where that point is, we can discuss. I mean, if you're writing about, I don't know, modern things where people are already disassociated from Judaism, you don't have to know so much, fine. But what if you start seeing these things come together, right? Where somebody has a Jewish studies professor on their dissertation committee, knows really only the most superficial understanding of Jews and their history, knows nothing about Israel except what he or she has read in the New York Review of Books and other extreme left publications and extremely anti-Zionist publications, and then gets a joint appointment in Jewish history and is teaching about Jewish history. And now, when you call them up to ask about, when you're a journalist and you say, what do you think of, you're a professor of Jewish studies, what do you think about the encampments at NYU? People saying they're anti-Semitic. And you have this person as a radical anti-Zionist who's going to say why they're not and why Zionism itself is anti-Semitic. And also adds these things. I mean, look, we talk about criticism of Israel, but so much of this so-called criticism of Israel, first of all, it's not criticism. It's, and this is what Adam was saying before, it's sort of insane talking about how Israel is evil, and it also has no connection to reality. It's not just criticizing this or that policy that we can have a debate about. It's sort of, saying Israel is committing genocide has no connection to reality in my mind. And if you've never been to Israel, you know nothing about Israel. You think all Israelis are monsters, and you have no contrary opinions. I mean, at least David Myers, knows a lot of Israelis and has been to Israel and knows what it looks like. I mean, David Beale, who is not an anti-Zionist, is married to an Israeli woman.
He's not an anti-Zionist?
He's not an anti-Zionist.
Huh. Okay. He's done so much for their movement. Wow. Okay.
I will defend him about that, against that charge, but it's not my job to defend him. We actually had he was the only person who reached out to me about my essay.
Really?
Who was criticized it.
Okay.
Or by name or not by name. I got almost no negative feedback, which was really interesting. I mean, some people I said like, I liked your essay, but but he reached out to me. We had a really interesting correspondence. And he had a lot of very smart things to say, and interesting things to say, but that's neither here nor there. But, when you see these two things coming together, and I think this is probably already happening with like Jews in the West or settler colonialists who aren't doing tshuva for the sins of aren't repenting for the sins of their ancestors who might have killed Indians, or might not have, who knows. But then you have something really, really bad. If you look, there was just a Brueges, I'm throwing in all my Yiddish words there. There was just a big fuss at I don't remember.
What's the Yiddish word you used? Broide?
Brueges.
That's Broydes?
It's Broyegez.
Broide? I don't know that one.
It's Hebrew. It's Hebrew for biroges, which is in fury, but it's Yiddish for like a big fuss or a big to do or a big source of anger.
Oh, okay.
If I say I'm Brueges with him, I'm Brueges with Jaratani, it's you've deeply offended me somehow.
We always said making a tzimis growing up and stuff like that. But
yeah, this is like one step further.
Right.
Okay, so there was I think it was UC Irvine, but I somehow just deleted it. Here we go. On May 31st, I'm looking at a tweet from the Amcha Initiative, which is a pro-Israel thing, that UC Irvine claimed to expand the Jewish Studies program with 2 new full-time hires, Rachel Smith and Margot Fatoussi. Okay. Now, I looked at it seems that their names have now been taken out from UC Irvine, so maybe something happens, but this is not well, what's happening at UC Irvine specifically is not the issue. The issue I want to raise is that these people have signed all kinds of anti-Israel statements, including pro-boycott Israel statements. And Margot Fitoussi is an anthropologist and filmmaker, and on her dissertation committee is someone called Nadia Abu-El, who is a professor of anti-Semitism, or at least anti-Zionism, at Columbia University. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. She has a degree in anthropology. She made her bones by writing a book about how all Israeli archaeology is, unlike any archaeology anywhere else, is a vast quest to make up Jewish connections to the land of Israel and erase the Palestinian connection.
Did you write Mahmoud Abbas's speech at the UN a couple of years ago? It sounds like a...
One wonders, right? So it used to be that you had to go to Moscow and study at the KGB's Patrice Lumumba University to be able to produce this kind of stuff. Now that you can do it at the Middle East Studies Department at Columbia, which, I mean, was one of the first institutions to go really, really bad. Martin Kramer has been writing about this for 2 decades.
Well, Edward Said, I mean, that's
yeah,
the roots in many respects. Yeah, no, you see, Irvine, and the interesting thing is, what I understand, and I think some of this has been discussed publicly, there's an issue, not just at UC Irvine, but it's also who controls the Jewish studies programs, who controls the hiring at many institutes. No one is actually housed in Jewish studies, but they're housed in their respective departments, and they make the hires. Now, again, I still have this view that historians are, on the up and up, more so than many other disciplines in the humanities. I'm sure I will be disabused of that increasingly in the coming years. But, imagine if an anthropology department, which we agree that aside from the area studies, identity fields, anthropology is probably one of the worst of the mainstream disciplines in terms of the anti-Israel sentiments going on there. What if they're in full control of a hire for a, quote, Jewish related position in anthropology? And then that person is going to get associated with their interdisciplinary program. Maybe they'll even take over as director because it's such a small program. That's not reasonable, right? It's not reasonable for, 12 anthropologists sitting in a room with no training in Israel, who are either utterly devoid of knowledge or politically active against Israel. It's very hard to find an anthropologist who's pro-Israel, and then make the hire. I mean, it's a real big problem. And I try to imagine that for Africana studies, where you have someone bashing African Americans. They're a sociologist studying African American crime, and they're not putting all the blame on white people. And imagine like a sociology department making that hire. Not that it would ever happen, but they make that hire and they tell Africana studies, okay, this is your guy. He's going to be directing your program. I mean, it's insane to think about.
I mean, imagine if an anthropology department wanted to hire Charles Murray.
Yeah, who's Charles Martin?
Charles Murray,
The
bell curve guy.
Oh, okay.
Who and Mosaic contributor, most important Mosaic contributor. But he's famous for writing this book, but the bell curve, which very controversial.
Charles Murray. Okay, I didn't
Charles Murray. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was another, early warning. Not that I would necessarily support his research or anything, from what I've read the bits of that book. But I mean, he was attacked when he went to Middlebury almost a decade ago. I mean, there was actually a mob of leftists who attacked him and the professor, Alison Stanger or something like that, who brought him to campus. And she was injured. She I don't think she broke her arm, but she was moderately injured, from the attack. I mean, they actually got violent here against someone because they don't like what he has to say.
Yes. I mean, I was trying to think of like the most toxic person in the view of the academy.
Well, in Jewish studies, that would be Stephen Cohen, but that's and you mentioned him you mentioned him also.
Yes. And again, what's interesting about Stephen Cohen is not that he got canceled for sexual harassment.
For our viewers who don't know, Stephen Cohen, sociologist by training, I believe.
Sociologist, he's the Brandeis guy.
He's what?
Brandeis guy, right?
Is that where he taught? So. No, he was at Hebrew Union College, I think.
Yeah.
No, Brandeis. Brandeis.
He taught at HUC for a long time. I don't know where
but he was at Brandeis ultimately, wasn't he? Because that's where that whole issue came up with Jonathan Sarna and the AJS fiasco.
Well, Stephen Cohen was already like retired by that point, so I don't know the connection with Brandeis exactly. But in any case, wherever he was,
All right. Could be wrong.
Stephen Cohen produced. You probably know his work better than I do, but near as I can tell his work, and I saw him give a presentation once at the AGS. He was producing work on Jewish reproduction, right? Reproductive trends, and he was looking at the extent to which Judaism was passed on generationally in halachic versus non-halachic marriages, right? If I were to sum this up in one sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe his conclusions were largely that Judaism was not being passed on as much at mixed marriages and non-halachic marriages as they were with halachic marriages.
Yeah, which in some ways is not surprising.
No, I mean, it seems rather obvious on a certain level.
Yes, but the interesting thing is after he gets in trouble, people start
for sexual
saying,
harassment, in case anyone knows, and severe sexual harassment. This is not one, he touched someone's shoulder somewhere. Severe sexual harassment, bordering on assault, if not assault.
He was because when I was doing the Schusterman program at Brandeis, he had to be, he suddenly was not there. And he was part of the programming. And it was at that point that he was, that he got into serious trouble. And there was a student, a graduate student, she was a recent PhD that wrote an article. I think it was for the Forward or one of the major Jewish publications about
Karen, I forget her last name, but
what happened to her. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so maybe he was supposed to present the Schusterman program.
Right. Okay. All right. So all right. I thought that it was on faculty at Brandeis, but okay, I could be wrong.
It broke out in the summer. I remember reading all about it. It was summer 2018 because I was in Montreal when it happened. Okay, anyway, so sorry, go on. Yeah.
So what happens is after he gets in trouble for this, people come out, academics come out and say, it's not just his conduct that is a problem. It's his scholarship itself, that he has this demeaning attitude towards women because he's fixated on women's bodies and reproduction and women as baby-making machines. And because of this weird fixation, it should have showed us that he's, has this demeaning attitude towards women, which is shown in his personal conduct.
Well, that's the thing is when this whole thing came out, and I was there in the midst of this Israel Studies program that I was doing that summer, there was a lot of the conversation about how, and this came well after that, for months and months afterwards, about how you can't disconnect his scholarship from the sexual harassment. And I don't understand that at all.
Well, I got 2 points here. And one of them, first of all, okay, the scholars in question who went after him had an issue with his conclusions. And I imagine a lot of feminist scholars and scholars who believe in, let's say patrilineal descent. I'm not putting myself out there with any, of my own personal beliefs here, though I do favor patrilineal Judaism, but that's just me, or mixed marriages and this and that. Obviously, they find his scholarship reinforcing of Orthodox Judaism in a way that probably offends them.
He's not an Orthodox Jew.
But that's not the point. The point is that they're able to now link his scholarship to his behavior. And for them, that's their gotcha card, right? So they're able to say, see, this is a perfect example of the abuse of scholarship.
Matrilineal lineage and not sexually harass women.
100%. Yeah, it is possible to separate those things. But also, Andrew, just to press you on this point,
please.
Didn't you just make the same claim about people who lack cultural fluency in Judaism, that their lack of knowledge of Jewish stuff has informed their scholarship and their behavior because they're in the anti-Zionist camp? It's not exactly the same thing, but isn't there a similar sort of pattern here that you're making a claim about?
Yeah, but nobody accused Stephen M. Cohen of lack of knowledge.
Right.
And it's a very good point that you make. But nobody accused him of that, and his studies are based on data, and and also, I'm talking about people's political statements and connecting that to their scholarship, not their personal conduct.
Right.
But also the sort of content of this argument. It's bizarre. The brilliant Ruth Weiss, who wrote a piece about the Stephen M. Cohen affair for Mosaic, also it's called The Hounding of Noam Pianko, because Noam, who was the head of the AJS at that time, became the sort of sacrificial goat for this whole thing. She called them, I think, dulling Marxoid pronouncements, and that's what they were. This sort of ridiculousness about, and here's the real point I want to make. If Jewish studies, of course, is going to be something that Jews look for to understand their condition. So you have Jewish studies, the academic discipline, but of course, Jews, right, who want to, like Jewish leaders, Jewish organizations, Jews who are just Jewish journalists sitting around in their attics and their mother's basements thinking about what they're going to write about the Jewish condition, are going to turn to the academics to look for knowledge. And the most basic kind of knowledge is sociological and demographic knowledge. Just how many people are there? Where are they? How do they identify? Are they men or women? How old are they? This is the most basic kind of knowledge, really, for any kind of question or field. And here he's doing the research. And if you want to have an argument about patrilineal versus matrilineal descent, if you think this is something in which empirical data could be relevant, I mean, if you want to look at it from a purely theological standpoint, either pro or con, then maybe it doesn't matter. But if you want to bring empirical data into it, somebody needs to collect that data. And you're saying that the very collection of this data, the very pursuit of these questions, and the very possibility that Jewish studies could be used by Jews to perpetuate the Jewish people is bad. So Jewish studies can be used for me to say, I'm a professor of Jewish studies and you Jews have been very naughty. But it shouldn't be used for helping Jews continue the Jewish people.
That's their argument, what you're saying here.
That is what their argument boils down to.
Yeah.
That is, and that seems to be the direction of Jewish studies is
right. I mean, there's obviously a legitimate debate about the extent to which an academic identity field, which Jewish studies is one, should play a role in building identity or not. There's a debate to be had about that. But Jewish studies, I mean, that's the name of the game with all the other ethnic studies programs. It's about building. They're used to build identity, yet Jewish studies is being singled out as committing some sort of heinous crime when it is used to build identities. But if Palestinians want to use Palestinian studies to build identity, that's great. So there's a major contradiction. There's a major double standard. And it's deeply problematic.
Yeah. And it all only goes in one direction.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where, unfortunately, David Myers and my conversation sort of ended. But, if we had a couple professors out there who are Jewish studies professors who are radical anti-Zionists, and a few who are sort of mainstream liberal Zionists, and a few who are right-wing Zionists, and it all went in different directions, then we wouldn't have a problem. And look, we're never going to academia, for whatever reason, has, for as long as I've been alive, and probably significantly longer, has always leaned to the left. I don't think that was the case in 19th century Germany or England, but it's been the case in the US for a long time. And I don't expect that to change. But we're talking about an extreme situation where Jewish studies professors are the most radically anti-Zionist. And I mean, that we have at one of the universities, now I don't remember which, the former chair of the Jewish studies department was arrested while she was participating in one of these encampments.
Oh, yeah. But she wasn't Jewish studies, the one who screamed, "You can't arrest me, I'm a professor," which is one of my favorite quotes of last month. She wasn't Jewish studies, was she? No, it was Dartmouth. It was Dartmouth. But she helped found the center like a decade earlier.
Okay. But she was at some point the director or something, because I remember I did my due diligence on this at some point. But yes, and somebody else sort of who's not 100% in Jewish studies, which is also
she's not. You look back at her work, she didn't really, for some reason. I mean, this happens often. She was slated with the task of building up a Jewish studies program there.
Yeah, but you get almost nothing on the other side, and that suggests that, this goes back to the title of my piece, which is Jewish Studies Against the Jews.
Well, I mean, Myers, when he had that piece about the violence that took place at UCLA, I mean, he starts saying that, well, there are Jews in the who are in the encampment, and therefore what these people are doing is an anti-Semitic attack when right-wing Zionists come on because they're attacking Jews. And that doesn't make any sense. I mean, just because they're Jews doesn't mean that there can't be espousing anti-Semitism. It's entirely possible to be the case. And again, Myers, there was friction and violence and harassment on both sides, and Myers only came down on one side in his piece.
Exactly. And again, this is so he did tell me, and I had missed it. He wrote something about complaining about some effigy at one of these protests that he thought was anti-Semitic. But he's written a lot of pieces in the press. I'm not talking about academic pieces since October 7th, and just in his career in general. And they always come out in defense of the anti-Zionist cause and critical of the Zionist cause. If you ask him, he would not tell you that he's an anti-Zionist at all. And he would tell you that he's somewhere in the middle. But it's a striking pattern that he feels that his job is to criticize the Jews and rarely to criticize the anti-Semites, especially if those are anti-Semites on the left.
And there are others who do it too. Shaul Magid, Joshua Shaines. Joshua Shaines is not as notable a person as Shaul Magid and David Myers, but I mean, Carlip's piece, went after Shaines, and I've gone after him in some of the stuff I've written because he bandies about the phrase, Jewish supremacy all the time. He just constantly was using it over and over again. And it's like, at some point, you can't use that phrase. You're an academic, coin a better term. If you want to say that Jews are acting supremacistly over Palestinians, fine, make that argument, but don't use a word associated or a term associated with Nazism, right?
Yeah.
Just don't do it. It doesn't help us. It really hurts us.
It's what academics like to call the weaponization of language.
Yeah.
Right. And it's even worse because Shaines and Magid are taking these criticisms and directing them not just about Zionists, but at other Jews. For Shaines, it's Orthodox Judaism.
Oh yeah, he has a major grudge and an agenda against him, probably because he was a Chabad emissary for like a decade or something like that.
Oh,
he was a David Sorkin student too, actually. But he was abroad, proselytizing. So I think there's, again, Magid, if you read his biography too, he went from following the Grateful Dead to being a Kahanist and being in the IDF, and so there's stuff going.
And how you go from being a Chabad shliach to a rabid anti-Zionist.
These people are looking for something in their lives. I have an uncle like that, right? They're always on a quest to find meaning, and they never really find it.
They had something in their lives when they were Chabad shliachs.
No comment. But I will say the first head of the Avsekti, I can't remember his name, but he was an ex-Chabad guy.
Oh, really? What was his name? God. Yeah, I mean,
was it Moshe Litvakov? Could that be it?
It could be Litvakov.
But I think he was someone who started out Misnaged, became Chabad also, and then became communist. And it was not somebody who was like a lifelong Bundist who then went communist or a lifelong communist. It was somebody who flitted around.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's why my argument always is, you want to understand Zionism until the inception of Israel. You got to look at the Pale Settlements. I mean, this is where this ideology was born. You want to understand David Ben-Gurion, you need to study Bolshevism, Menshevism, Bundism. This is the cultural environment that he came out of. And a lot of these guys were switching back and forth between these different militant parties. I mean, let's face it, Zionism was in the Russian context in a liberal political ideology because they were living in a liberal environment. And some people went nationalist, some people went communist, and some tried to combine the two, and some moved back and forth between these things. I mean, look at Joseph Trumpeldor, an officer in the Tsarist army. He was like a big war hero. And then he said, no, I'm renouncing the state that gave me all this mobility, even though I lost an arm in battle. Abraham Tahomi, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was he in the Irgun? He might have even been in Lehi, but he came out of Odessa, which is why I read his memoirs. And he was there during the Civil War. And he was like, really, he was having this existential crisis because Mishka Yaponchik, the Jewish gangster, Isaac Babel, based Benya Creek on, was actually defending Jews in pogroms. And he was saying, I feel so powerless here, I'm a Zionist and this and that. And here we have the gangsters in Odessa who are really taking the lead and they're defending the Jews, probably, for self-serving purposes, but still, they were doing it. And he has this great passage where Trumpeldor came to town. I think it was probably before World War I. I don't know where Trumpeldor was during World War I, but he gave this speech. He was a committed Zionist at this point, and an officer in the army, and all these young Zionists are looking up to this guy because he's a Jew who fought back, right? Not for the Jewish people at first, but he still showed a Jew can be a military figure, and this is terrific. And then he goes off to Palestine and ends up dying in that settlement dispute up north with that mythical quote, "It's good to die for your country," which he probably never actually said. So my point is that during that time period, people were moving back and forth. In the Yevsektia, those guys were true believers, right? They were, a lot of them came out of the Bund. A lot of them saw what the Bolsheviks, how they changed their nationality policy and were willing to cultivate a Jewish identity. And they said, hey, this is our opportunity. We can, bring about our project, just working under a government that is going to have a shot one day, but we don't know that.
And the Bolsheviks had made communism work. Nobody else had made it work. I mean, in the sense that they actually had a communist revolution.
Well, I'll put work in quotation marks, but
Yes, of course. I mean, yes. But they had made revolutionism work in that they actually seized the state and the means of production and everything else.
And this was a state severely oppressing the Jews. Like, I don't, I don't hold the same grudge against the Yevsektia that I hold against the Jewish studies people today, even though people like to compare them. Because the people today, they're working in an environment where the Jews are essentially secure and free. We're increasingly coming under threat. But they're deciding to launch some sort of revolution here. They're partaking in this revolution that is deeply, anti-Semitic, when we're in an environment that things are more or less okay, for us. But you don't blame people in the 1920s who are working to overthrow, using violence, an utterly anti-Semitic system that had been severely oppressing Jews for well over a century at that point. And it's almost a no-brainer. You're going to join a revolutionary movement there if you don't want to be oppressed anymore. And you realize your religion is not helping you if you're going to leave your religion. But that's fascinating about a Chabad, a guy from Chabad going and becoming Yevsektia. Does Tzvi Gadelman write about him in his book?
He probably does.
Yeah, I read that over 20 years ago, so I don't.
It's been a while for me too. So yeah, probably does. I'm gonna run to my bookshelf in the other room as soon as we're off and try to find his name.
Well, we've passed the hour mark, so we should start wrapping. This has been really a great, terrific, engaging podcast, and you're clearly involved in what the mission of the Jewish Studies Zionist Network is. And even though you're not inside the academy anymore, you've had your foot in the door for 6 to 8 years in graduate school, I assume, and then writing academic related pieces for Mosaic. And we need to, as I was saying to Adam, we need to really harness all these different groups, bring them together and engage in joint projects to really, really push back, because the public does need to know that there are people willing to stand up, and we have over 200 signatories who are willing to stand up at this point.
Good. Yes, I have to say, in terms of the other people doing good stuff, there was an open letter written by a few professors at Binghamton.
Yes.
Alan Arkush and Jonathan Karp, which was and a couple other people, and this is it was in like the Binghamton Daily. It was something that didn't make the national news in any sense.
I'm sure I must have read it.
But it's the kind of small thing that Jewish studies professors can do that I think makes a difference.
Absolutely. I'm assuming, was it a statement with a signature? Oh, here it is. Speech starts dialogue. Okay. Yeah, no, well, Karp was on our podcast about 3 or 4 episodes ago, and he describes his anti-awakening, his awakening to to coming and realizing that what he calls anti-Israelism, separate but related from anti-Semitism, has engulfed the academies. So there are more and more people. There's more and more people, and importantly, we're getting more and more big names to come onto our statement. Big names and insiders. not just outliers or people who are emeritus. So hopefully that's
Good.
growing. There's also you didn't mention it in your piece or podcast either. Alvin Rosenfeld and the whole Center for Contemporary Anti-Semitism in
Yes.
Indiana, and they've hosted a lot of good talks about academics,
Definitely.
including me a year and a half
Yeah.
ago.
And Alvin has always been a sort of heroic figure in Jewish studies about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's just hope that there's more to come and our field is not, completely destroyed.
We're also working on a statement by Christian Zionists that's going to be spearheaded by some of the Christian scholars who have signed on to our statement.
Good.
Yeah, but the signature's open to any Christian Zionist who is in academia, irrespective of what they work on. And the point that we want to get across is the Jewish left, they're always slamming Christian Zionists and say, oh, the only reason they like us is because we play a role in the return of Jesus and they don't actually care about us. And that's simply not true. I mean, that's obviously a factor. And it might be true for some of the really notorious ones like Hagee. But the rank and file of them, I mean, they don't say, oh, you're a Jew, I'm not going to let you into my house, but, thank you for helping us bring Jesus back. I mean, they're not anti-Semites, right?
Yeah, and besides, I would take Hagee over so many well-meaning professors who really don't feel themselves to be anti-Semites, who are not Jews, but who hate Israel, and would turn to you and say, like, well, how can you, isn't it so hard for Jews to support Israel when it's committing genocide? I would take Hagee any day.
He's made some outright anti-Semitic comments, though, not just.
I'm not disputing any of the complaints about him, but I would just say I would take him over these other guys.
Yeah, but these other guys, and I've met a lot of them, and Adam certainly knows a hell of a lot of them. Adam gave a presentation on them at CW a year and a half ago. They respect us as people. They respect our industriousness. They think we're smart. Okay, maybe they're stereotyping a little bit, perhaps, but they think some of us are smart. But they want to support us, and they believe that Israel represents good values and is the birthright, the ancestral birthright of the Jewish people.
Yeah, they're genuine philo-Semites. There's an institution called the Philos Project. I don't know if you've hooked up with them yet. But they're not only Israel focused, but they're making they're for Christian engagement in the Middle East. So they deal with all kinds of things. But they're very much been very vocally trying to stand up against the anti-Semitism that's going on. They've come to protests, especially anti-Israel protests, where in places where there aren't a lot of Jews around, and they've had counter protests and stuff like that.
So I'm very happy to have their support, and they're people who are not going to abandon us. At least the older ones, they're not. Especially if it's part of their theology, it's not. They're not going to leave us. And people say, well, they think you're going to go to hell in the next world for not accepting Jesus. It's like, okay, I don't believe their theology. I don't think it's right. What do I care if they're going to hell? Like, if they're going to support us in this world, and if the left is going to attack us in this world, I'd rather have the people who think we're going to be punished in the next world than in this world, and
the people who are trying to get us to the next world.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. Just don't
overly asking a good friend of mine who's a strong Christian Zionist, who's also one of the signers of our statement. I asked him, I'm kind of concerned about the impact that Candace Owens is going to have on Christian evangelicals and their support for Israel, because she has a pretty big fan following. I'm concerned. What do you think? He said not to worry, that she's not going to have much impact at all, and that Christians are deeply pro-Israel, and there's really nothing that Candace Owens could say to change that.
Isn't she a Catholic? Did she just Catholicism, or
I think she did convert. Yeah.
Okay, well then they're not going to like her anymore. They don't like the Catholics. Yeah. Some of them dislike the Catholics more than more than Jews. I mean, they have idol worshiping of the Pope. They have near as I can tell, they have a problem with that stuff. But I'm not going to delve into this.
But with some exceptions, like paleo-kids like Pat Buchanan, you tend to have Catholic conservatives are still pro-Israel.
Yeah.
In America. Yeah.
So we at Mosaic, I have to say this now. First of all, very early on, we published a long piece by a guy named Rob Nicholson, who's just wonderful, about sort of explaining evangelical Zionism to a Jewish audience. And really, I mean, you can just Google Rob Nicholson and you'll find all kinds of great things. But Rob Nicholson, Mosaic, you'll find this. And he really explains the theology. And it's often, there's a kind of theological sense that the Jews are our older brothers and we have to respect them and feel a sense of kinship with them, that goes beyond Zionism and end times and all this other stuff. But we also had a piece about Catholic Zionism and how a portion, it's more complicated for Catholics for various theological reasons. DaCosta, I think was the author's name, Gavin DaCosta. I hope I'm getting it right. But really interesting about the sort of movements in the Catholic Church to embrace Zionism, which again, doesn't come as naturally to the Catholic Church as it does to American Protestants. But there's this movement. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, but you know, when you get occasional quotes from people like Hagee, you have people like Joshua Shane's Mobilize, and their war is against what he's called Christian nationalism, civic nationalism, and he uses civic nationalism because he wants to implicate the Orthodox in that, like this American form of nationalism that's Judeo-Christian, and they despise that phrase on the left. They despise Judeo-Christian because they think it's anti-Islam, and that's the point. It's an Islamic phobic term by definition. So, but they'll take these quotes from Hagee, merge them with some Orthodox rabbis who say some reprehensible things, and they'll put them all together and say, see, this is it. This is what, America's right represents, and it's white supremacist, and it's Islamophobic, and it's this and that, and it's anti-Semitic, because they managed to find one or two quotes to back it. And then they claim the Orthodox Jews are going along with it, as if these guys on the left are not going along with anti-Semitism in their respective corners.
And again, this makes it's not just a way to bash Israel, it's a way to bash the Jews.
Yeah. Which, gets back into all these questions of self-hatred, and I'm not a psychologist, I won't go there, but it's not that they hate.
We know a psychologist, though.
Oh, yeah, what's his name?
Yeah, the hair on fire guy, yeah.
So it's not that they hate being Jewish, it's they hate what the Jews are today. And they want to remake Jews in their image, which is where the parallels with the Yivsiexia do have a role to play there. They want to refashion Judaism with their revolution and to make the Jews acceptable, palatable for the progressives. That's we have to make the Jews kosher for them, right? Which, maybe during the Enlightenment, you could sort of see, precursors to that. I would hardly put them in the same camp as someone like Moses Mendelssohn or by any means. But yeah, they wanted to show that Judaism is a progressive, for the time period, progressive religion, and that it's squares with Christianity. It's in that debate between Dom and Michaelis and so there are roots in Jewish culture for this, but
and then it squares with bourgeois ideals. And in some ways, extreme anti-Zionism is a kind of sign of being a member of a certain kind of cultural elite.
Absolutely. But if you look at something like Heinrich Heine, he's great because he didn't take any of this shit seriously. He did it. Hey, let's do it. Let's baptize. Let's have some fun with this, and let's make fun of everybody. Something like that I could respect. He's being a government guy who's trying to have some fun here. He's not deadly serious about attacking this stuff, and that's why you could appreciate Philip Roth and Larry David and things like that. Who, sometimes they might make the Jews look kind of bad, but this is satire, right? And what these guys like Joshua Shanes and Shalom Magid and David Myers are doing, it's not satire. They're playing a very deadly serious, and in the case of Omer Bartov, a very dangerous game, because he's a good historian, and people believe that he has, the requisite knowledge of genocide to actually make these statements.
And he does that.
And
he's a Shmigegi of the year, Though he's been upgraded to Shmendrik at least at this point, if not worse. We could call him a Potts if we want. That's all right. All right, well, maybe on that note, we should finish up. It's been a long episode, but I think this was well worth it. We really dove into the issues that we've been honing in on since we founded in 2022, almost 2 years ago. And I've been writing about this stuff for several years, and we are glad to now have Andrew Koss and Mosaic, fully on board with our project to save the Jews and Jewish studies from themselves.
Amen.
So without further ado, let's say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.